By the same token, let us hope that the events of September the 11th discredit the relativism that has played so large a part in the creation and spread of the underclass way of life. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as usual, Shakespeare can say in a line what we lesser mortals take a book to say, and I cannot express better what my book is about than quote a line from Macbeth: that we but teach bloody instructions, which being taught, return to plague the inventor. Thank you.
For the microphone. Mr. Wilson, come on, bring a microphone.
One thing that is curious, maybe just coincidental, is most of the underclass in this country are either recent immigrants or blacks who've had a rather difficult history. Whereas in England, your underclass hasn't really been as underprivileged as our underclass, and I wonder if that's a meaningful distinction at all.
I think it's a meaningful distinction in the sense that it should serve as a warning to the United States that the United States is not dealing just with an ethnic problem. And the development of what I'm talking about has been so rapid in Britain. Of course, I believe that Britain started off it was a much more fragile society, actually, than that of the United States in the first place. But nevertheless, what has happened has been so dramatic that the United States should take it as a warning that while you might feel assured at the moment that it's only a subgroup of your population that behaves in this fashion, it can spread.
Speaking of underclass behavior spreading, I wanted you to comment on the nature of underclass behavior spreading to the upper class in Britain, particularly the royal family, in terms of their behavior, and given at some point how the royal family was really virtually discredited in terms of their dysfunctional behavior. How long do you think the royal family will survive as a monarchy in Britain?
Well, of course, the royal family has always been dysfunctional, but but has managed to hide the fact, both because it behaved with slightly more discretion, and also because I suppose the media of mass communication were less intrusive. And certainly it's not very long ago that however miserable members of the royal family were, and I'm sure that many of them were extremely miserable, they wouldn't go on television and be interviewed and pour out their angst and so on, which is extremely boring. My idea of hell is listening to a 10 billion year interview with Princess Diana. It will eventually destroy the royal family, yes. Incidentally, one of the members of the royal family recently appeared with a stud in her tongue. And no doubt that one day one of the princes will have love and hate tattooed on his knuckles. Madam?
When you're talking about the underclass, do you mean lower class, working blue class people, or unemployed people, or how do you designate underclass?
Well, I don't think there's a clear designation. I don't think that there's a clear cut-off point and you can say this person belongs to the underclass and that person doesn't. Now, traditionally the underclass is the group that is unemployed, perhaps unemployable, or at any rate doesn't seek to be employed. But of course this is not a very large section of the population now because our unemployment rate is extremely low. And yet the underclass way of life has expanded with the economy. And so I think this is a very important point, that the underclass way of life is a way of life. It is not a response to economic circumstances, in my view. And therefore, the human relations that exist in the lowest sector of society are spreading inexorably up the social scale.
I've heard you speak before about the problem of people who never see or meet the type of people you deal with every day, simply not believing what you have to report about them. A problem of ignorance, of disbelief, of a wrong...
They screen them out. I'm rather reminded, I once went to India, to Delhi, and I stayed with, he was, I think, the head of the Indian Army Medical Service. And opposite his house were some Mughal ruins, and of course being a foreigner, I immediately said, oh, we must go off and see these Mughal ruins. Well, he didn't want to go and see the Mughal ruins, but he was very polite, and he came and was on some waste ground. And on the waste ground, there were little huts and some very short and very dark people, obviously untouchables. And I pointed to them and said, who are they? And he was a Bengali with blue eyes, I remember, and the general turned and looked at them and turned back and said, I don't see anyone. And I'm afraid the English intellectual class is very like that. And I recently had lunch with a publisher, and I was trying to describe to him the abysmally low levels of culture and education in Britain. And his argument against me, he lived in Hampstead, which, as those of you who know London would know, is an extremely rich area. His argument was that his son, who went to a private school in Hampstead, was well educated, and when I said that the people I met didn't know when the Second World War was, had never heard of Shakespeare. In one case, when I asked, what's 3 times 4, he said, we didn't get that far. That was after 11 years of compulsory education. He said, well, my son knows all this. So what can be wrong? I think you're just exaggerating. And he'd never been to any of the areas. I presume he went straight from Hampstead to his office and back again, and simply refused to recognize it. Because if he did recognize the truth, it would blow apart his whole world view, his philosophy, I think.
Back to what this young lady was asking you before about the underclass. I'm still a little bit confused. Are you limiting the underclass to those that are severely economically disadvantaged? Because I got the impression that you were sort of referring to others as well.
Well, originally, the underclass, what I'm referring to both is a class, but I think it's much more important than a class. It is a way of life that has spread. So that originally it might have started in the lowest economic sector. But now, for example, and I was saying this last evening, I have nurses coming to me to tell me that they are living lives exactly like the patients with whom they deal. And now even doctors are beginning to lead these lives as well.
What do you mean by underclass? Is that economically defined?
Well, originally it was, but it is a way of life now.